Hey, Coach Robert here. Here's another thinking technique for you. This one also applies to the opening, but it's applicable across a wide range of openings. I'd say from beginner to about 1500 FIDE. And it's a set of three ideas that you can use to evaluate your opening moves to decide if they're actually effective. Basically, good opening moves are going to assist in your development. They're going to contribute to your ability to castle, and they're going to enhance your center control. So let me explain what those three things mean with some examples. Development is a little bit of a tricky word for starting players, especially juniors, to remember, but it essentially means how active your pieces are. Another way to remember it is a phrase, wake up sleeping pieces. So when your pieces start the game, they're all kind of not doing anything, right? I'm not highlighting the king because we don't want to really utilize the king in the middle of the board early on. But all these other pieces, we would like to see them out and doing something. So it's quite intuitive to say, I want to wake up the pieces. So an example of waking up the pieces might be playing the move e4. You might not have picked this intuitively as how you would wake something up. You might have picked, for example, this move. But you can see that these moves both accomplish the same goal. If we look at this one, you can see that the bishop now has a lot more scope than it did before. You know, for example, if a rook came up to a6, the bishop could take it. That wouldn't have been true before the move e4. So e4 is actually activating the bishop, even though it's not moving the bishop. It also activates the queen. So if any pieces come for free on this line, the queen could take them. Otherwise, we could even maneuver our pieces out to whatever squares we think are good on those lines. So we get more options when we wake up the pieces. Knight c3 also does this. It controls the center of the board, among other squares. You know, it might also be useful to control like b5 or a4 or even squares on your own side of the board. So it does that. And the knight is out. It also enables us to eventually move a rook across the board because the knight's no longer blocking the rook. So this is all about waking the pieces up. So that's one thing. So you want your pieces to get developed, and ideally we would develop all the pieces pretty quickly. I've noticed that many players, even adult learners, they'll rely on just a couple pieces for several moves in a row. And this is not really advisable. Only if you have some kind of very compelling reason to utilize the same piece repeatedly, like if you're making a free capture or a successful attack on the king, not just a random check, then you might want to move the same piece again and again. Or if you are defending a piece that's under attack, that's fine. But in the absence of those kinds of forces, it's important to try to utilize every single piece. Development is, in my opinion, number one in the opening. After the opening, other things are more important, but we got to get all the pieces out. The next thing is castling. So you might think that castling, which is a special move if you don't know with the king, you might think that castling is, you can't really do anything to make castling happen. That is just kind of like you have to wait for your chance. But you can castle very effectively if you just choose how you develop your other pieces in an appropriate way. For example, if we're talking about kingside castling, you can actually castle to the kingside in just 4 moves. Here's a sample where both sides are playing to castle quickly. They're also developing the pieces, right? So we're moving the knights out, moving some pawns out, but the goal is to get the king castled. So here white has done it in 4 moves. So notice that these moves, e4, knight f3, and bishop c4, were the fastest moves to clear the way. We can't castle when there are pieces on f1 and g1, so we just made moves with those pieces first, as opposed to the queenside pieces. You could also castle to the queenside in 5 moves, but it takes a little bit longer and it entails a little bit more risk. You can see my video about castling if you're curious about that. Okay, so that's what I mean when I say preparing for castling, moving the pieces out of the way so that we can eventually make that castling move. And here I could also show how maybe black will do the same thing. Like we castle, they move their knight, and then bam, castling is done. So that's another example of the same thing. So developing the pieces, important. Castling your king, also very important, because we should castle early and castle often to avoid getting attacked in the middle of the board. And the final thing is center control. So the center is constituted by the squares e4, e5, d4, and d5. These 4 are our center squares. That's really important. No matter what level of player you are, the center is going to be very important. So if you attack these squares, I would call that successful center control. And often a good player will attack these squares several times for good measure. An example of that might be like this. We play d4, black. So the move d4 is actually not controlling d4 itself, it's attacking e5, but it also brings the queen into contact with the d4 square. So it does both. So when black plays d5, they're doing the same thing. They're attacking e4, and their queen is gaining control of d5. So this is a multi-purpose way of attacking the center. So next, let's pretend that white plays like maybe knight f3, attacking two center squares. Notice that it doesn't stand in the center, but it still attacks the center. Black might even do something similar. Another way that we could attack the center in this position might be with bishop f4, and black could try bishop f5 as well, or any of some other options. So these are all moves that attack center squares. They line up with them, and we might even attack them multiple times, which is good, because it means you have a firm grasp on the center. So the reason I'm presenting this method, as opposed to the last one where I said that there's a particular order that we should develop in, like knights and bishops, knights before bishops, the reason I'm showing this one is that you might enter into some kind of foreign opening territory. People will often ask me, they're like, oh, I learned this opening, but no one ever goes into it. What do I do when people do something unexpected? Well, you can lean on this thinking technique pretty reliably, even in foreign soil. So let's pretend that you're playing black and white starts with c4, and maybe you've never seen this before. This is the English opening. You might be wondering, well, first of all, is this even a good move for my opponent? So you might think about these three things. You would see that it controls d5, so it's controlling the center. It might help the queen to come out, but it's not clear if that's good. You might want to see some of my other videos where I talk about utilizing the queen early in the game. So the queen has some extra options that might be good later in the game, but it's not clear that it's good right now. And you can also see that it doesn't really do anything to contribute to castling, not even to the queen side. So c4, it seems like it's a mixed bag. At least that's the kind of lay interpretation of this move, if you only have this heuristic method of thinking of center control, castling, and development to go off of. So this move seems okay. So now you have to choose your own move. So you'd like to choose a move which does all three of those things. Something that helps you to castle, something that attacks the middle of the board, something that wakes up your pieces. So if you're considering e5, you would see that this actually does all three, right? It attacks d4. It wakes up this bishop, so we don't know where the bishop belongs yet. If you're going off of the rule that I discussed in the last thinking technique video, we usually wake up the knights first, because the bishop might be good on any of several squares. We don't know which one it is yet. But the knights are a little bit more forced to choose a certain one. But anyway, it's good to wake up the bishop, even if you don't know where to put it yet. We also wake up the queen. You know, we have lots of options, even if we don't want to use them yet. And this also helps us to castle, because when we move the bishop, you know, this is now possible, so we're one step closer to kingside castling. We could move the bishop and then castle right on over. So the move e5 actually does 3 out of 3 things. Now let's see a couple more sample moves. White might play knight c3. Wakes up a piece. Sounds good. Controls the middle of the board. Yeah, that's great. That's a lot better than, for example, knight a3, which wakes up a piece but doesn't attack any of these 4 squares. So knight c3 is good in that way, but it doesn't help us to castle. So you could call it maybe 2 out of 3. I think if something only does 1 out of the 3 things, it's probably not a good move, unless you have an extremely important reason to do it, which I'll get into later. So the move knight f6 gets ready for castling, controls the center, wakes up a piece. That's good. It does 3 out of 3 things. Knight f3 is just like that, you know, by analogy. Knight c6 also just like that. We're waking up a piece, we're attacking the middle, but it doesn't help us to castle. Now the move g3 is a little bit less clear. It helps the bishop to come out. It doesn't attack the center of the board. It technically does help for castling though, because right now the bishop has no other option. So this one's kind of like 2 out of 3. Wakes up a piece, helps for castling. Anyway, so let's say we play like bishop b4. Doesn't attack the center directly, does wake up a piece, does help us to castle. So that's 2 out of 3. I think you guys are getting the point by now. Lots of the moves can be evaluated in this way, with this simple technique. This is like a development scheme where both sides are doing things that do at least 2 out of the 3 things. Even this rook move, right? We're attacking the center of the board. We have a piece there, but we're also giving support to that piece. So just because we're attacking the center doesn't mean we necessarily want to go there immediately. Anyway, so this is a sample. The limitation of this thinking technique is that sometimes you have to play moves for very concrete reasons. It depends on very nuanced strategy. You can't just boil it down to such simple terms. However, this is useful in a wide variety of positions, so I would say that this is good up until around like 1500 feeding. Just to give an example of a situation where you might want to play a move that on the surface doesn't really match with this heuristic but is actually a good move, let's take a look at a pretty common beginner opening line where both sides develop the pieces to attack the center, and they try to castle quickly, but they also are waking up all the pieces. In a position like this, which is pretty typical for players around like 800 rating, or even, you know, pretty high, pretty low, around that center point. In this position, it's frequently good to play a move like h3 instead of castling. The reason is very concrete, but this move would probably not come up as a good move if you were going off of these three criteria, because it doesn't control the center, it doesn't help for castling, and it doesn't develop a piece. But it is actually good, because in a more advanced way, it's stopping black from doing the same thing that, you know, basically following the method. They want to wake up a piece, they want to try to attack the center. Pinning this knight to the queen is kind of like an indirect attack on the squares that are controlled by the knight. So bishop g4 is a useful move in general for black, and so stopping your opponent from playing a useful move is kind of like playing a useful move yourself. But that's a more advanced way of thinking. It's not something that you can easily find with this thinking technique that I'm outlining here. Similarly, black might want to play h6 here and stop white from playing bishop g5. So anyway, it has some limited usefulness, but I like to think of it still even from time to time now. Okay, so I think that's it. I will talk about another thinking technique that's a little bit more advanced than this regarding calculation next time. So if you like that, feel free to subscribe, and you can look out for some more thinking technique videos. Take care.